My name is Ian and you are watching Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you're new here and you like this kind of content, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Today we are in beautiful Borrego Springs in Southern California, not too far from where I live, and we are testing Triumph's updated 2024 Scrambler 1200 XE and X. So Triumph have made a number of revisions and updates to the XE and the X, including an updated engine, different suspension, updated electronics, and they've actually dropped the price, if you can believe it, on both of the models, but especially the X model. So we're going to ride both models today. Well, actually for me it's going to be today and tomorrow, but you're going to see it all in one film. Talk about some of the changes, talk about the pros and cons to these updated Scrambler 1200s. So let's go. All right, so here's the two models right here next to each other. So here's the updated X model, which used to be XC, and here's the updated XE model, which is largely still the same, except you can see a different suspension. So, you know, they're very different motorcycles. The fact that the X is so much lower, it sits so much lower to the ground, which is kind of hard to see in this video, but you can kind of see here the difference in the seat height is pretty massive. So, here's the X model. Let's take a look. So you can see the suspension travel. They've taken about an inch out of it. It's the Marzocchi fork and shock. You can also see the different brakes. So the difference in seat height is pretty dramatic, you know, between these two bikes. The other thing that they've done, well, some other differences between them, I guess. The swing arm is much longer on the XE model because you have the longer travel suspension. They have to do that, but also that's going to make the bike handle more stable off-road. It's just going to have a different handling feel than the shorter bike with, of course, the shorter swing arm. Some other differences you can see. So the controls, like the brake lever here, you can see this has an adjustable brake lever. You've got different foot pegs. If I show you the controls on the X model, it's more of a lower, like you don't have the adjustments here, and the foot pegs are a bit different. So as you can see, both the models still use a 21-inch front wheel. So, you know, you still have pretty decent off-road capabilities with the X model because you still have the 21-inch front wheel. You still have, you know, somewhat relatively long travel suspension. So it still has some off-road ability. But the difference, you know, of course, going up to the long travel bike is pretty massive. So which one should you get? If you're not going to do much off-roading and you can live without cruise control and the better brakes, then probably save the money, and also, you know, much lower seat height. So if you're vertically challenged, the X is a much better option, dramatically lower. If you're a taller person, you don't mind that, and you want to do more off-roading, and cruise control is something that's important to you, then the XE model is absolutely worth the money, and it's actually arguably a better value because, I mean, look at the brakes you're getting, the suspension you're getting, some of the extra features. I think it's well worth the additional about $1,700 that they charge. All right, my first impressions of getting on the updated 2024 bike. You can feel the additional torque. What they did was they changed the throttle bodies, they changed some of the exhaust stuff, they tweaked the engine a bit, and what you have is the power has been moved around, so the power and torque come in lower in the RPM range. But what I feel so far, and I tested the previous Scrambler 1200, oh gosh, maybe less than a year ago, I would say, and this feels noticeably punchier. It actually feels like it has more power, even though technically it doesn't really have more peak power. But in the real world, it feels a lot punchier, and it was already pretty strong, so I appreciate that. So for 2024, what Triumph has done, as we sit here behind this traffic and we're about to hit the rain, what they've done is the XE model, they've changed the suspension from the Öhlins and Showa over to our Marzocchi, I don't know how to say it right, front and back. So they've done that, but the travel remains the same. It's long travel, 9.8 inches. You've got the twin shocks in the back. Everything's fully adjustable. Really premium suspension, so that's good. The XE is the tall, off-road oriented one. So the XE, the suspension is completely different and has much better brakes than the X model. The seat height is also correspondingly much higher on the XE. It's about 34.8, I think, around that, and the X is almost 2 inches lower than that. So there's a huge difference there. The XE also comes with a different dashboard, which is much nicer than the one on the X, and it comes with cruise control. It's a one-touch cruise control. It doesn't have up and down functions, but it's great to have the cruise control. So for about $1,700 more in the price, and I'll put the prices up here somewhere, the XE is a really good value, actually, because for everything you get, suspension, brakes, cruise control, a bunch of other stuff, it's a great value to go for the XE if you're tall enough. So then what they did was they used to have the Scrambler XC, or X-ray C as in cat, XC model. I have to do that because it sounds the same when I say it. XC, XE, whatever. I think that's part of the reason they changed it. What they did was the XC model is now the X, and the X, you can see, that's Adam Waheed right there, another fellow journalist. He's riding the X model. That replaces the XC, and what they've done is they've lowered it about an inch from the previous bike. They've taken out around an inch of suspension travel, and they dropped the seat height around an inch thereabouts. They've also, so that bike is even more accessible than before, much lower seat height, which is noticeable. It doesn't have all the fancy stuff of the XE. You know, it doesn't have long travel, doesn't have some of the suspension adjustments, doesn't have cruise control, doesn't have the nice dashboard. But what they did add to that was cornering ABS, cornering traction control now, which previously it didn't have. So that's nice. Now the bike has an IMU, so that's a nice thing. What they've also done is, well, they've dropped the price about $1,000 actually cheaper now for an actually what's arguably a better motorcycle if you're buying that model. So that's pretty phenomenal. They were able to do that. All right, so here's the dash on the XE model. Just like in my full in-depth review I did, you can see it uses a much different dashboard layout and design. It's a TFT dash, but I really like it because you've got the different information here on the sides, which you can scroll through, some lights at the bottom, and you've got this big swinging tachometer, and you can have different layouts here. You can change this display. If I go over to the X model, you can see that it's using Triumph's display, which is going to be familiar if you've looked at like a Tiger 660 or a Street Triple R, something like that. It's more of an LCD display. So you've got this tack up here, speedometer, and then you have another screen down here. Also, the handlebar controls are different. So it's like a different control interface between the two bikes. Personally, I really am a fan of the upgraded display on the XE. So this further differentiates the bikes. Gives you the cruise control. You also have an additional rider mode here. You have the off-road pro mode where you don't have that on the X. So again, just another factor where if you're okay with the additional height, you really should be looking at the XE, because the extra money you pay, you get so much more for that money. And one final change I wanted to point out here while I've got these side by side is the handlebars. The handlebars on the XE are much wider than the handlebars on the X. That's for additional leverage off-road, for more stability. So again, all these things, I know they kind of seem in a way like the same bike, but when you change the wheelbase, when you change the swing arm, when you change the suspension travel, you change the handlebars, the ride height's much different. You really get a much different ride feel instead of sort of strengths and weaknesses between these two models. So I think what they've done is they've differentiated the two models more, which I think is a good thing. All right, it's been a very cold and very wet press ride so far. It's about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's been just pouring down rain all morning ever since that little clip I showed earlier. I turned the camera off. It's been raining ever since then, so it's a little challenging to do a bike review in this kind of weather, but tomorrow's supposed to be sunny and we're going to be riding off-road tomorrow. So I really wish that these bikes had heated grips. There's no heated grips even on the XE model, which I think is, you know, for this price point, it would be a really nice thing to have. And all of us are really wishing we had that right now, because everybody's hands are freezing, you know, because without heated grips or heated gloves, the wind chill just gets through your gloves, no matter how nice the gloves you have. So we're actually cutting today's ride short and heading back to the hotel to wait for the rain to stop, and then we'll try to go out and do our video and photography later today. But you know, riding this 1200 XE, this updated one, I talked about the updated engine. It really does feel stronger. Other than that, it's kind of the same bike. once I ride the X model, that's going to be more to talk about, because they've done a lot more with that model in terms of making it lower and updating the electronics and doing some other changes. So there's more to talk about there. I think it'll be interesting to get these bikes off-road. You know, I do still maintain the downsides. I still do stand by the things I said when I did the full review of this bike about a year ago. Things like the smaller fuel tank, it's only 4 gallons. The exhaust is always sticking on your legs, and it makes standing a little bit awkward too, because it pushes your leg out to the side. But really, you know, these are incredible motorcycles. They're so much character, they have so much torque, they're really fun to ride, they look incredible, they have so much character. They're really awesome bikes. So anyway, more to come, stay tuned. Taking a look at the electronics, both the XC and the X have customizable riding modes. So if you go in here to the menu, so on the X model you have a little bit different control layout than on the XC, but if you go in here, you can go into riding modes and you can configure the modes how you want. So for my off-road mode, like, you can go in and configure the ABS and traction control and the throttle map for the different modes. So I have off-road. Well, actually, I switched bikes again, so this bike's not set up. So if I want off-road mode to have my ABS and off-road, I can do that. Let's see, and then I can go map. I can change that traction control. I can go here to, I gotta go here to off, yeah, select that, make sure, okay. Now, let's see, ABS you can't turn completely off on this one. It's a little bit different than on the XE, so that is something that's different. So now if I go to off-road mode and select that, you can see it comes up TC disabled, because I told it I didn't want traction control in that mode. So it's nice how you're able to customize some of the electronics on these Triumphs. I really do appreciate that. Now, what's going to happen though is if I cycle the key and start the bike up, now the bike, if I check my riding mode, it's no longer going to be in off-road mode, because if you turn stuff off, then it reactivates, which is really frustrating and annoying, and I really don't like that. So, and I've ranted about this in other videos on other bikes, including Triumphs, but also Hondas and others, where it resets on you. I really don't like that. I wanted to hold my settings during my ride, because if I set it a specific way, there's a reason I did that. Now that the rain is settled, we can actually ride these bikes a little bit, you know. So on a twisty road, I'm still on the XE model, the tall model. And even on these Michelin Anarchy Wilds, you know, this bike does really well. Like, it's a pretty big, tall, heavy bike, but you can still hustle this thing pretty good. And what I really like about it is the mid-range power is so strong on this thing. It's just this wallop of, like, right there, 40 to 60 is just so good. Like, there's 40... 70, like 40 to 70 miles an hour is just a rocket. So it's really good with that mid-range. And you can feel the difference versus the you know, the previous 1200. It's not a huge update to the engine, but you can definitely notice what they did. There is a tiny bit of jerkiness in the throttle, like a tiny bit of on-off, like kind of lurch, but it's not much. It's, you almost have to try to notice it. What a beautiful time to be riding after the storm came through. Wow, this is a beautiful canyon too, just outside of Borrego Springs. One of my favorite motorcycle roads in the entire country, actually, right, this road. And I'm lucky I live nearby, so I get to ride this all the time. What you do feel on this long travel bike is that the chassis just bobbing kind of around a lot. And I mean, the bike has 250 millimeters of travel, or almost 10 inches, so that's why you get that kind of up and down motion on the chassis. You get used to it, but basically this is like a giant dirt bike in terms of suspension. So again, if you're doing mostly street riding, you know, probably maybe stick with that X model, if, you know, especially if you don't want the taller seat height. But this bike still performs well, but you do notice that additional kind of bobbing up and down with that long travel. Alright, so here riding the X model on the same twisty road. It's a little bit of rain, so I apologize for that if you see it on the lens. Yeah, there's definitely, you know, I was talking about all the chassis movement up and down and the suspension on the XC. With so much less travel on this, you don't feel it as much. There's still brake dive, but it's not as pronounced, and you don't feel the bike kind of bobbing around. So if you combine that with the fact that this bike is lower to the ground, giving her a lower center of gravity, I'd say this bike feels a little bit more confident on twisty roads. Even riding it here in the rain and the wind that we have right now, just feels a little bit better for carving up the canyon. It's not a huge difference, but if you're trying to choose between the two, you know, keep in mind this is probably a little bit better. But then again, you don't have the nice brakes, you don't have the suspension adjustments, you don't have some of the other things you might not think about, like the cornering clearance. I scrape my boots on this bike more because, again, you're lower to the ground, so I tend to scrape things a little bit easier on this one than I do. Ow, there was a foot peg. So that seems to be more of an issue with this bike. Probably need to tune the suspension a little bit if I was going to keep riding this particular bike. But we're switching off different bikes, so all the settings could be all messed up for all I know. But I'm definitely noticing scraping foot pegs quite a bit on this one, so that's also another thing to keep in mind that you might not have thought about. And this engine is really nice, though. What a phenomenal engine. Yeah, and you can definitely feel the difference in the brakes between the two bikes. These brakes are definitely not as strong as the XE are. Gosh, it's windy. Jeez. You can't see it in a video, but I'm just being blown around like crazy. Punch it. Ooh, it's windy. Good God. Woo! So riding the X model off-road here, went through some whoops and some big hits in the suspension. So my ride leader here, he's on the XE, and there's a dramatic difference in the speed he's able to maintain because I'm bottoming out the suspension. I'm bottoming out my suspension on all these things. The bike actually feels really good off-road, especially with the Anarchy Wild tires. But you just can't ride super fast because of the limited suspension travel, because again, this one is set up more for street riding. These whoops are really challenging for this bike. It just doesn't have the suspension for it. My ride leader here on the XE, he's not having an issue at all, and he's actually heavier than me, so it's not about the weight. It's sandy out. Whoa, sandy out here, and you can easily have an accident if you're not careful what you're doing. So I'm taking it as a personal challenge. Whoa! Whoa! Oh man! Taking it as a personal challenge not to let that guy get away from me. But man, I'm getting roosted hard. You know, this thing is surprisingly capable. You just really gotta grab hold of it and really boss it around, because it's a big old heavy bike. It's a 500-pound motorcycle. See, I have the rear ABS turned off, obviously, and the front is still on. I don't mind that setup. I still get enough front braking. It's not too intrusive like on my Honda Transalp with that front ABS. One thing I will say about this bike, there's a lot of heat coming from the exhaust right here. So this whole part of your leg, especially off-road when it's warmer like this and you're really revving the bike hard, it gets super hot on your leg. Somewhat on the left side too, but mostly on the right side where this exhaust is here. So that is definitely a Scrambler specific issue. All right, we're in an off-road play area here, Ocotillo Wells, you can see, pretty cool. Just gonna play a little bit. I am on the X model, so, you know, can't go too fast because the suspension, well, it kind of sucks for this kind of stuff, but we'll make do. I mean, not many people are gonna take their Scrambler 1200s out in the whoops, but if you do, you definitely want to get the XE model for sure. I don't know where I'm going. Ooh-wee! You! These banks are so much fun. Whoa! Yeehaw! Oh, this gets really torn up by all the ATVs and dirt bikes that come through here. Oh, that's so much fun. Banked corners, yeah! So one super annoying thing with the Scramblers, because of the high exhaust, that exhaust is like right in your calf, and so when you're trying to stand up, you're awkwardly, like your ankles all bent out and your legs all bent out, and you can't really have your foot on a foot peg like you normally would. So it's really a huge downside, one of the most annoying things about this bike, because of that high exhaust, you know. And I showed this, I illustrated this when I did the full review, but it's really I don't think you can see it in the video. This is Adam Waheed here next to me. I don't know if you can really see it, but it's something you really feel, and it gets really old, especially when we're out here riding these bikes all day like this. All right, we're kind of finishing the second day of riding out here on the Scrambler 1200 XE and X. I think my conclusion in terms of the off-road performance, the bikes are very capable off-road. The XE is really the one you want to get if you go off-road, because once you start hitting things, riding faster, the X falls apart because of the lower ground clearance, less suspension travel, bottoms out very, very quickly. One other thing I wanted to point out is I really appreciate Triumph's wheel design. They use these Acront rims. It's tubeless spoked wheels, so tubeless is nice, and you can see the spokes kind of come out here on the sides, just like they do with BMW and Harley and some of the other brands. So I do really appreciate that very much. Also, the LED lighting is good. Overall, everything is very nicely finished on the bike, and they chose some pretty nice components. But I think you should look at the X model as more of a street scrambler, and the XE is the serious off-road one. So I think they've differentiated the bikes quite a bit more. So I know this wasn't really my usual in-depth review because I'm out here just riding, so I can't really do that, but I'll link my in-depth review to the 1200 XE that I did last year. I'll link that somewhere below. If you have any questions, comments, put them down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please ride safe, and I'll see you out there.